Good morning again, everyone. My name is John Angelico. I'm a public information officer with the SFMTA, and I work on the Potrero Yard Modernization Project. And this webinar will cover the SBE and DBE Plan update for the Potrero Yard Modernization Project. We'll begin with a brief presentation from the SFMTA and PNC team, followed by a formal Q&A session during the second half of the meeting. If yesterday was a gauge, the presentation itself will take about 15 minutes or so. So you'll have a lot of time to answer or ask questions. And here's how you can do that. Everybody who's in the meeting right now is considered an attendee, and you can't speak unless we unmute you. So to request to be unmuted, you would, on the bottom of your screen, you see a react. You should see a react icon in that set of tools down below. If you click on that, you should have a chance to raise your hand. So when you raise your hand, we will see that when it becomes time to have the questions, and we can unmute you so you can ask your questions. Now, if you're on the phone, it's a little bit different. If you'd like to raise your hand, and if you're calling into this meeting, you would press *9. And to unmute yourself on the phone, you would press *6. So we'll explain this again when it comes time to have that done. But that's how this would work. And you'll also see a couple more things in the tool set down below. You'll see a Q&A icon, and this is where you can post questions. If you post a question, we will see it, and then we can answer it in line. When we answer it, the question will become visible to everybody. But before we answer it, it's only something we can see. But we would prefer that questions and answers be handled at the end of the meeting during the question and answer period with a live conversation. So that's where you can raise your hand, and then we can unmute you to have that happen. Let's see. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can type them into the QA box, as I mentioned. We'll assist you with any technical issues. So you can reach out to a host. You can see the list of hosts in the participants list on your screen as well. And we'll try as best we can to figure things out if there's an issue. So let's get started. There's a couple more people rolling in. Good morning, folks. This is the second of two information sessions that we're holding to discuss the SBE and DBE draft plan that was just recently released this week on Tuesday, November 5th. And a reminder that the public comment period will last through Tuesday, November 12th. And you can send your comments into potreroyard@sfmta.com. And we'll put links to this plan and a reminder of the email list to use in the chat. But since you are here, I'm sure you have an awareness of how this is working anyway. So at this point, I will hand it over to my colleague, Chris Jauregui from the Potrero Neighborhood Collective, and he can begin the presentation and introduce folks with his team. Take it away, Chris.
That's good. Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. As John mentioned, we will have a little presentation to discuss the recently released SBE DBE plan for the Potrero Yard Modernization Project. We'll do a quick introduction, explain some of the changes from that have occurred from when the LBE plan was initially released earlier this year, and then describe in detail what the SBE DBE goals are, as well as the set-asides that are identified in that draft SBE DBE plan. And also talk a little bit about the process and the procurement process with contractors. And then we've set some time for a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So happy to address all questions at that time. So we're joined today by representatives from Potrero Neighborhood Collective and SFMTA. From Potrero Neighborhood Collective, we have myself, Chris Jauregui, Mara Rosales, and Miguel Galarza. And from SFMTA, we have Virginia Harmon and Nichole Truax. I'm sure folks are familiar with SFMTA, obviously. Potrero Neighborhood Collective is a development team. It's a collection of infrastructure developers, housing developers, consultants, architects that have been working closely with SFMTA for the past 2 years in what's called the pre-development phase to advance development of the Potrero Yard project. That work includes putting together design concepts, working on addressing environmental concerns, and finalizing a final EIR, which was finalized earlier this year, advancing entitlements, site due diligence, and ultimately selecting a contractor to enter into a design build agreement with Potrero Neighborhood Collective, in short for PNC, who will serve as the developer for a longer term design build finance operate maintain agreement with SFMTA. As I mentioned, we do not have a contractor at this stage, so the group is really a set of developers, architects, and consultants. Most recently, been very fortunate enough to have Mara and Miguel join the PNC team, acting as what we're calling our liaisons for SBE and DBE initiatives. And so they're present today. We want to also explain, as I mentioned, some changes that have occurred since the LBE plan was released in March, April, early this year. Perhaps I'll turn to Nichole from SFMTA to provide an update there.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good morning, everyone. As some of you may be aware, there is a lack of funding resources for this project, and therefore this project has transitioned from a locally funded project to a project that includes federal funding. Our office contacted the FTA, and we were informed that we are not permitted to use a local business preference program for this project, which means LBE requirements cannot apply. However, federal regulations allow for local hire requirements, and the local hire requirement is 30% for construction. The LBE plan has now transitioned to an SBE DBE plan. With that said, LBEs, SBEs, and DBEs that do not exceed the SBE size and DBE statutory threshold caps are considered SBEs under the SBE DBE plan. The draft SBE DBE plan is posted on SFMTA's project website. Public comment on the draft SBE DBE plan is open through November 12th. Chris, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thanks, Nichole. I'm going to hand it off to Miguel shortly. What I wanted to do is also just elaborate on the PNC team. I mentioned it's a group of developers, housing developers, infrastructure developers, and consultants. We also have an architect engineering firm, Arcadis, who has been supporting us through these past 2 years to advance a conceptual design through to schematic design. The intention is for Arcadis to continue to work with the selected contractor in the next phase, and work in a capacity as a designer through a design services agreement with that contractor. We do have some, and you hopefully have seen that in the draft SBE DBE plan, references to how an SBE architect design firm would engage with the contractor and ultimately engage with Arcadis. We can come back to that in the next few slides. Miguel, can I turn it to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Community, LBE community, SBE community, as previously stated, the program as originally concepted has now switched over to a SBE DBE program. It's important to note that if you're only an LBE certified firm, no harm, no foul. MTA considers all LBEs to be SBEs and DBEs, so it's one in the same. So you are eligible to be included in this procurement. What's important to note is that as we transition from the LBE program to the SBE program, there were certain considerations that were given based on disparity studies that were done for utilization of the community at large. In particular, design professionals have been noted to be a goal of 20%. So design and professional services will be at an SBE goal of 20%. And based on the disparity study, there is a 5% carve out for women-owned businesses and DBE as a DBE goal. So the combined for professional and design professionals is 25%. On the construction side, the SBE goal is 15%. And again, based on the disparity study, 5% is can be achieved by a Black-owned and or women-owned DBE goal. So the combined goal in this case is 20%. It's to note that the proposals must include at least one SBE designer for the project agreement phase. It could be more than one, but for the purposes of the agreement, there must be at least one designer that is SBE on the team. Participation will be counted towards the goal, design, and the professional services in the SBE goal. So all of them will be included in ultimately being that 25%. The important point for those of you that are in the construction fields is the next portion of the presentation, which emphasizes the set-aside portion of this procurement. It has been determined that based on the utilization and the budgets that are available for this project, that concrete contractors will have a 10% set aside that needs to be met by SBEs. On the earthwork and the paving portion of this work, it has been determined based on the capacity of the market that 100% of this work will be set aside for SBE, LBE, DBE. When it comes to the drywall, 30% of all drywall on this project will be set aside. When it comes to the electrical, 10% will be set aside. On the insulation and acoustical portion of this project, 100% of the budget will be set aside for SBE. Such is the same for the landscaping scope, 100%. Traffic control associated with this project will be 100% set aside. The trucking and the hauling portion of this project, 75% will be set aside for, again, SBEs. And lastly, construction cleanup, it will be 100% set aside. These determinations were based on the availability, the local marketplace, and the agreements that were worked out within. Participation meets towards the goal, and whether you're an SBE, a DBE, or an LBE. So with that, I'll return it back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Miguel. So I mentioned at the start that Potrero Neighborhood Collective does not yet have a contractor on board. And as part of the pre-development agreement we have with SFMTA, we are in the process of bringing on a design build contractor that will enter into a design build agreement for the design build construction portion of the project. So in that process, we are asking those contractors to put forward to identify the various SBE and DBE consultants and really put forward a plan of how they will respond and be in compliance with the overall SBE DBE plan. So specifically, within 60 days of contract award to the successful proponent, that design builder will identify all SBE and DBE sub-consultants for the design and professional SBE DBE goals. Within 90 days after notice to proceed, that same contractor will identify all SBE DBE subcontractors to meet the construction SBE and DBE goals. Again, there's a lot of information included in the draft SBE DBE plan that articulates this more. And as John mentioned at the top of the hour, we welcome comments on this during the comment period that is runs until Tuesday of next week. Probably should have gone to this slide first. Again, the public comment period is open now to take questions, to take comments on the draft plan that was released earlier this week. Specifically to send comments, please email potreroyard@sfmta.com. That concludes our presentation. I do want to I think maybe turn it over to John so we can start the question and answer session.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So this is our question and answer period. We've got ample time for the remaining period of this meeting to entertain your questions and comments. So if you do have a question or comment, you can raise your hand, as I mentioned earlier, in one of two ways. If you're joining this on a computer and can see this with a visual component of Zoom, look at the bottom of your screen for the React icon, click on that, and then you'll have a choice to raise your hand. When we see that, we can unmute you and you can ask your question. If you're on a phone, the way to do that raising of the hand is to press *9. And likewise, we can unmute you. You can ask your question that way. So far, nobody's got their hand raised. And I don't see any questions. Oh, there's somebody. Vic, I'm unmuting you now, and you should have a chance to speak. So take it away, Vic.
I want to make sure I understood correctly that for your designation of SBE, San Francisco LBEs will be considered SBEs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So it isn't just a matter of a Department of General Services certification as an SBE.
Virginia, as our CCO representative, if you could provide the distinction between services and San Francisco MTAs, SBE.
Miguel, I'm happy to take that one. So the eligible SBE certifications are the California Unified Certification Program that certifies DBEs, the California Department of General Services that certifies SBEs, and as the caller, as the person mentioned, the San Francisco Contract Monitoring Division that certifies LBEs. So long as they don't exceed the SBA size and DBE statutory threshold amount, all three of these firms, DBEs, SBEs, and LBEs, are considered SBEs under the plan.
Okay. What about DVBE, Disabled Veteran Business Enterprise?
That is not one of the categories. Is that firm certified under the DBE umbrella with the CUCP?
No,
okay.
It's the Department of General Services certification, Disabled Veteran Business Enterprise. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't believe that is. We do have SBEs that are certified under the California Department of General Services. If it falls under their SBE, under that SBE classification, but it doesn't sound like it. We can definitely look into that and make sure that that is answered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a question coming in from Julie. Julie, I'm about to unmute you. You should see a request to have yourself. There you go.
I have a couple quick questions. The first one, you had a slide that mentioned when must SBE DBEs be identified. Will there be any sort of notification or RFP that comes out for SBEs, or is it going to be related to the design builders already having been selected and then within that 60-day contract award?
Yeah, I can take that one, John. So we do have a procurement and open procurement with contractors at this stage. We mentioned this is mentioned in the SBE DBE plan. As part of that procurement, there will be a day where we will schedule sort of have a public meeting to have contractors effectively meet the SBE DBE community, really meet all kind of subcontractors. So that is something that would be scheduled, that the Potrero Neighborhood Collective would be scheduling and then be seeking for participation in the coming days. That's something that we will schedule. But ultimately, in terms of the contractors putting together their responses, it's up to the contractors to identify which subconsultants they would be working with and identifying at those stages. So yes, it is with those contractors to put in their proposal.
Okay, and Chris, you said there's going to be a scheduled meeting. How can we find out about that?
We haven't yet scheduled it. It's we'll work closely with SFMTA communications team to make sure that that's publicized I would imagine likely similar to how the draft SBE DBE plan was publicized. But yes, nothing yet has been scheduled for that. But the
Okay, and,
intention of the procurement is to have that.
okay, I see. And then do you have contractors identified that are interested in this pursuit?
We do have contractors identified, yes, and contractors that have gone through a two-stage RFQ and now in the RFP stage. So yes,
Can you
there
share
is.
that information, or can I find that somewhere?
Yes, I think that's on the website,
Okay.
John. Maybe I'm looking to you. I'm not sure. I thought we had disclosed it on the SFMTA. We have disclosed it in the past. No problem sharing it now. So the three contractors are Build Group, Hensel Phelps, and Webcor were selected in an RFQ stage and are now in the RFP stage that we're currently in.
Thank you.
Did you, Juliet, you said you had another question, or maybe
Those are all.
Okay.
I asked several. Thank you, though.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Do folks want to raise their hand and make comments or ask questions? Once again, I put into the chat the information mentioned earlier about the public comment period. The public comments on this draft SBE DBE plan will be accepted through the end of day, Tuesday, November 12th. We published it on Tuesday, November 5th on our website, and I put a link to that as well in the chat. So the comments will be accepted through Tuesday, November 12th at the end of day. So when midnight Wednesday hits, that's the deadline, that's the cutoff. And you can send your comments into this email address, potreroyard@sfmta.com, excuse me. So that information is in the chat that you should all be able to see. If you don't see that, please let me know. And we can get that information to you some other way, but we have a question coming in from Ralph at Protect Safety. The question is, can you please expand on the safety scope? We are a local LBE/DBE and are interested in supporting. So does somebody want to answer that one live here and verbally?
I can start. So in terms of the set-asides that have been set aside for safety, Miguel alluded to, that is a set-aside as part of a larger SBE DBE goal. Ultimately, the scope for all of those categories that were identified by Miguel will really be determined by the proposing contractors. But maybe another way to answer that is that overall, it's really up to the contractors to decide, but that's not to say that anything is excluded. It really is sort of it is their proposal for them to determine. But I think the scope of work that you're identifying, or I assume that you're identifying, would be included in that. But ultimately, it is their proposal to select the appropriate firms they would be working with, the appropriate scope that would be carved out, subject to the SBE DBE goals and those specific set-asides for the categories. And Miguel, if I've misstated anything, please correct me.
Yeah, to your point, Chris, whether that's considered professional services or whether that's considered subcontracting, I'm not quite sure what specific scope Protect provides, but it may fall into different categories in of itself within the goals outlined. So I think that determination will be made by the contractors themselves. So thank you.
Ralph, thank you for the question. And if you have any follow-ups, you can continue to write them into the Q&A spaces as you did with the original question. But let's continue on. However, I don't see any other raised hands.
It looks like Ralph does have a follow-up question.
Oh, thank you. The question Ralph followed up with is, how about supporting on the CM side?
I think again that would likely fall under professional services of support to the contractor or maybe the developer, but I think that would be part of if that scope is required as part of that design build agreement, then that could fall under both of those categories. I think both of the similar to the response we gave, all of that would be determined by the design builders, and ultimately it's their responsibility to satisfy all the obligations that they have to do. And if that requires that services, then that would be understood to be part of their scope of work. But to clarify, the scope, the overall scope for those design builders is to enter into a design build agreement with Potrero Neighborhood Collective, and that ultimately the ask there is to enter into a fixed price and fixed schedule for the defined work to be included in that design build agreement.
Thank you, Chris. Ralph, continue to ask more questions if you'd like. Thank you. And I'm checking the list of attendees here. I don't see any raised hands at the moment. So maybe we are ready to wrap this one up.
John,
Yes.
if possible, can the person who asked the question about the disabled veteran, can they provide their contact information, and I'll make sure to get back to them.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that was Vic, and looks like Vic left the meeting. We'll track Vic down and get that information to him. Thank you very much, Nichole. But before we wrap up, and as we wait for more hands to be raised possibly, or questions to be typed into the Q&A space on the screens, once again, I'll remind you that the public comment period lasts through Tuesday, November 12th at the end of day, and your comments should be sent in via email to potreroyard@sfmta.com. And the draft SBE DBE plan is on our website. If you can see the link in the chat, but if you don't see that or want to find it some other way, you can go to sfmta.com and just look for Potrero DBE. Those two separate phrases, search terms, should bring you to pages that contain this draft plan. So as we wrap up, I'd like to invite anybody from our team to make a closing comment or whatever, but it looks like we might be at the end of this information session. So does anybody like to say goodbye or wrap up with any comments? I think we said a lot here. Oh, Julie says thank you.
Please send your comments in. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, folks. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.